The rollout of Genie Plus has been hugely contentious among Disney theme park fans. Today, we are talking through our feelings and first impressions of Disney's newest way to take our money.
Welcome to Always Planning Disney, where planning is half the fun. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Cheryl.
On this channel, we talk through all of the details that go into making our vacations magical. Now, we did talk a little while ago about some initial impressions about Genie and Genie Plus prior to the rollout. So now that we've had some time to take it in and to watch all of the park YouTubers share their findings, we can return to those first impressions and see where they stand now.
And if you're wondering what our impressions were, it was Melissa basically being like, no. that was where we landed on that.
Yeah. I was not a fan of it. And I guess some of this might be rooted in my feelings towards FastPass, which I enjoyed having. In theory, I enjoyed having. I don't think we used them all that well. I really liked waking up early and making my reservations. I loved waking up early and making my dining reservations too prior to the trip. It was great. It's just me in the morning and it's dark and my laptop. It was a ritual. I really appreciated it. And staying on property meant I could score some of the FastPasses, the big ones that we really wanted, like Flight of Passage, Seven Dwarfs, getting a morning safari in Animal Kingdom. I'd like to use one for that just to make sure you do get a morning one. Frozen Ever After. These things that would help us save time during the day. And then for the other ones, I was kind of fine taking whatever, because once we were in the park, as I mentioned in our last episode, we really like to just do whatever speaks to us. And so the stress of making it to a fast pass on time was always looming over me and sucking some of the joy out of my day. And we have actually skipped reservations because we were doing something else, or like the wind blew and we just changed our minds. So even though I know that you could book an extra 3 after using the first 3, I could never get that to work for us in the app. So we just never did. Forget it. So FastPass, I like it in theory, but obviously I wasn't using it to its fullest. So learning that I now have to pay for something like that, I said nope. I noped out real quick.
Yeah, I think that the history of FastPass really does have a lot to do with this. And I remember a time when there was no FastPass. I remember a time when you had paper FastPasses. So you had to, we would send the runner in our family, and we would just send her clear across the park with all of our tickets because we had paper tickets, and she would come back with our paper FastPasses, and then we'd go about our business. So I remember the olden analog days of Disney. I really liked the FastPass Plus program because FastPass Day, it, like you say, it was like a holiday for us. Like really, it was a big deal. For our last trip, my mom came over, she brought donuts. The sun was not even up yet, and I'm like still in my pajamas, and we made a whole big deal out of it. It was great. And I also just liked knowing that I had those booked long before our trip even began. I knew like we will be getting on these rides that are important to us. And it wasn't really a big deal to wake up early because I already had to work that day. So like I'm already up and going about. I'm not on vacation waking up early, right? So that's a big difference. And really like that dopamine hit that got me through the day, that got me through the next week, right? So it was just a rush to get the good fast passes when that window opened up. And I also think that last trip, we had a pretty strong fast pass strategy. And that was thanks to Disney Food Blog, because we learned a lot between our last trip and the one before it. So we booked all of our advanced reservations for the morning so that then we could get those extra ones throughout the rest of the day. And we would be looking for those as soon as we scanned into the queue. So we were using our time in line to get our next fast passes, and it worked really well. It helped us get on Slinky Dog without waiting in a 3-hour line, which we certainly were not about to do. So I felt like I was finally dialing it in, and now they have taken it away from me.
And really, I mean, 10 points to you because we skipped Slinky Dog. We didn't get a fast pass because our strategy was so weak, and we were not waiting in the line either. Do you want to start off with the free Genie?
Yeah, okay, so there is still a free option. Right, not for skipping the lines, but there is still something free available to us. What are you thinking about Freeney, as we're calling it?
Yeah, so I started watching lots of videos, and I was getting more and more confused with each one until the hero emerged. Molly at all ears, thank you so much. And the Disney World free Genie Challenge video is the one that really made me feel like I had a complete understanding of what was going on. I also just had to open up the app on my phone to really get a feel for it. I adore the tip board. I think that this is going to be such a beautiful tool to use. So the idea of having Genie plan my day for me from top to bottom, I'm a bit of a skeptic, and I fear that Disney has some motives behind why they're doing this. And I think, although the real purpose is likely to spread out crowds, which is good for everybody, as Molly showed in her video, it leaves lots of holes in the day. It might make some odd recommendations. And she said something along the lines of Genie is good, Genie is smart, but you need to be park savvy too in order for it to truly work. I don't trust Genie to plan my entire day because I think I know too much about what we want to do in order to hand it all over to an app.
I feel the same way. I do not trust the Genie because it has all of these years of data, right? I don't think it's using all of these years of data to help me personally, my party, have the best day possible. I think it's using all of that big data to spread out the crowds, like you mentioned, and to ease labor issues, because that's always been a concern with the Disney parks of like, where do we place our staff, our cast members, in order to make sure that we have the cast members there that we need to. And that's why we have the park pass reservation system now, which seems to be here to stay, which I don't love. And I think that's also the purpose of the Genie, is in order to just help make sure that they have the cast members they need where they need them. And if they don't, to redirect crowds in order to push them towards the places where their staff aren't doing anything. I don't love that.
I agree. And I think that that is likely why some of the things that I have seen appear with free Genie are there. As Molly revealed, the app may give you big gaps in your day, or it won't always tell you the soonest option for quick service dining, even if you're ready and you're there. And that's likely in order to help with those crowd and labor issues. And so if you're going to allow Genie to plan your day, you still have to get in there and change some things if your plans change. I am not into being on my phone that much. Genie doesn't look like it is ready to also pivot you towards things that you're closest if you say go off the path that it gives you, which we totally would, because we just wing it when we get into the park. And it also looks like the app isn't ready to adjust things based on current or changing wait times. And that's just not enough flexibility for us because we don't usually have much of a plan going in. And so to have something that's that strict, but that still needs fine tuning and adjustment, it's not going to be a good fit.
Yeah, I think some of what we're seeing right now are flaws in the system, and I think they're going to be worked out, because what we're hearing from Disney is that they want to make improvements based on guest feedback. So I'm glad that we're not going on vacation to Disney for another year, because they have time to work out those kinks. I have time to learn more about how people are using it and make informed decisions for my own group. But that being said, I think that other issues are by design, or they're going to emerge and they're not going to be resolved on purpose because they're beneficial for Disney and not for individual users. So I think some of these things are going to stay because they're good for the mouse. One feature that I haven't seen yet, but I really hope is coming, is the option to reduce walking, to say that you would like to walk as little as possible as opposed to wait in line as little as possible. Because when I'm watching the All Ears team using Genie, they're crisscrossing the parks back and forth all day long. And that's just not feasible for our party. We have one person with mobility limitations. We have a small child with little legs who might not be as into the stroller next trip. And touring plans had this option. We used touring plans on our last vacation, and we selected that we wanted to have as little walking as we could in our plan. So I imagine, since Disney seems to be encroaching upon what touring plans was doing, I imagine that they will replicate that feature, and I really hope that they do.
Overall, were you pleased with the touring plan that you got on that last trip?
Not entirely, but I think that's because the crowd calendars were wildly off base. And so we had a touring plan set up for us that was based on level 3 or 4 level crowds. And what we wound up with were level 8 crowds. And I don't think we got a good touring plan out of it. And we set up our touring plan maybe a week in advance of our trip, maybe even less than that, within a week of our trip. So we were trying to get it as accurate as we could, but we also didn't want to be fiddling with it throughout the trip. We wanted to just set it in advance, print out little cards for each of our groups, and be on our way. And it didn't work out to do it that way, because I think it really needed that real-time information to let the system know that there were a ton of people in Disney that week.
And I really hope that Free Genie ends up being able to do more real-time adjustments. I know that I know in theory it's supposed to be close to that, but it definitely seems like that needs to be fine-tuned. And overall, for the Free Genie, I think if you're brand new to a Disney World vacation, and I might even do this just for fun, it would be helpful to create some fake days, review the plans, see what it suggests, do it a few times just to compare those. At this point, as our party goes to Disney often enough that we are very comfortable when we walk in there, we sort of have what we're going to do. We tend to do sort of the same thing every time. We have a flow that we like to follow, blended in with our favorite, the random inspiration to go one way or the other. And so I just don't think Genie will be able to keep up with the way that we function in Disney, but I'm going to be using the tip board for sure. I love seeing that tool there as a list. I enjoyed the map that is still there, and it shows wait times and locations of things, but there's something about the linearness of that tip board that really speaks to me.
I agree. The tip board, and specifically the projected wait times, will be the main features that I use. And just getting that little graph like you do for Google business things, where like, how busy is it going to be? I think that's going to be really helpful, but I'm feeling skeptical about those even. So at several points on the All Ears videos, we've seen those folks get into a line that looked like, based on the projected wait time, it looked like it was going to be shorter within a few hours. And they would say, why is the Genie sending me here when it's supposed to go down in an hour or two? And then they got off the ride and said, wow, it wound up being a much shorter line than the posted wait time. So like, isn't that interesting? And Molly had said, oh, well, it was a shorter line, but the Genie doesn't know that. I am certain that the Genie knows that. The Genie has access to so much data. And so I think what's going on there is Disney is not posting accurate wait times, and they're inflating them by quite a bit. So I'll be watching the YouTubers really closely to see if that changes, if because of all of this data that now their guests have access to, they need to post wait times that are closer in accuracy. I think they're always going to try to go over, because obviously you don't want to disappoint people by waiting longer than they expected to, but just making them closer so that people aren't finding that the line is half as long as the projected wait time. That's crazy. So I'll be interested to see if that changes. And if it doesn't change, how else I might kind of work with that and learn about it and take that into consideration as we make choices on our trip.
And the good thing is this part of Genie is free. So if we use it and are disappointed, oh well, it was free. And if we don't use it, again, nothing lost. But the same cannot be said for Genie Plus, which at this moment is running $15 per person per day. And so FastPass stressed me out when it was free. And I am not sure how I'm going to feel if I have to pay for it. Additionally, while I love waking up to plan ahead of my trip, I don't want to wake up at 7 when I'm on vacation. So I don't know how I feel about that. However, I do want to say, when I was playing with the app, it seemed like it was fairly easy to still get a paid Lightning Lane, Genie Plus, not the individual one, even midday on a Saturday for pretty popular rides. So I don't know if you necessarily have to be up at 7 unless you're trying to virtual queue your way into something. I think I could let it go till I'm actually awake for the day.
Yeah, I was also worried that like the good rides were going to be really hard to get and sort of sell out for the day quickly, but it does seem like you can strategize and you can get everything in, even if you're not making the first reservation right at 7. So my biggest concerns, aside from having to pay for the darn thing, which is obviously not ideal. My biggest concerns about Genie Plus were making reservations at 7 a.m. of every day of my trip, because yikes, that's a lot of early mornings. And also just being on my phone all the time, because like I said, I'm trying to like take in the Disney magic of it all. And it's hard to do that when you're on your phone all the time. But then I was thinking about this more, and I'm already an early riser, and I do that on vacation too. I like to get up and going quickly. I like to be ready, or most of the way ready, before my family is even awake, because then I can help my son get ready and we can get out the door. And my husband is already on his phone a lot. So I just don't know if these things are like actually that big of a deal. I think that we could probably divide and conquer and do pretty well. So like I could make those initial reservations for the day, and he could be the fiddle faddler and mess with, you know, what's our next reservation going to be? Can I switch around and get an earlier reservation? All of that kind of stuff. So I think we could kind of lean into the tendencies we already have, and it wouldn't have that big of an impact on our trip.
And I know I have said no to this a few times in this episode and in previous episodes, but I am going to say we're going to use this for sure in Magic Kingdom, just because of the sheer number of rides and attractions that are in the park. I think the way we would use it is not a wake up at 7, unless someone happened to be awake sort of fashion. But I think if we're in a specific area, we would grab a Genie Plus Lightning Lane based on whatever happens to be near us, and then ride other rides, hop on that one, just to help condense and shrink a little bit how much time we're spending waiting in lines, to try to cram a little bit more in. I've watched videos that have strategies for how to use these and to, you know, work with the individual lightning lane. It's too much for me. So I think we're just going to have to show up, grab some of the Genie Plus Lightning lanes that are near us, figure it out in real time when we're there. But Magic Kingdom has so much that I think we're going to need it just to be able to get through everything that's there.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same just about your strategy, or your refusal to strategize maybe.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense to kind of alternate a lightning lane reservation with standby rides. And for standby, I mean, whether or not they have lightning lane. So I'm not necessarily interested in being like, well, I paid for lightning lane, and so I'm not going to wait in line for any of those rides, because if I'm not actually going to save any time by getting a lightning lane for Small World, then like that's not actually a big deal to me. So I think I'd again rather minimize walking and just do things that are nearby one another, and maybe not use the lightning lane for every single ride that has it.
Yep. And so when Molly did the All Ears video, Should You Pay, where she went head to head, only riding rides without using Genie Plus Lightning Lane, as opposed to somebody only using Genie Plus Lightning Lane, the wait times at first, I was like, well, these are totally normal. You don't really need Lightning Lane. But then she got into the Peter Pan flight line, and it ended up being an hour and 20 minutes, which is insane. That's a lot of time to spend in line. And really, we have no problem walking into lines that have posted wait time of like 45 minutes, because first of all, it does tend to be a little bit shorter. And I don't know, you're at Disney, there's lines for things. That's just our headspace. However, ultimately, the conclusion of that video showed that using Genie Plus Lightning Lane, the total time spent in lines for, I think it was like 7 of the most popular rides at Magic Kingdom, was only 30 minutes, as opposed to poor Molly stuck in line for 3.5 hours. So that experiment really made me a believer, even though I likely will use it sloppily and without a lot of purpose.
Me too. That was an eye-opening video for sure. And I'm really glad that they ran that experiment. I still think that you are still spending a lot of time waiting with Genie Plus. It's just not necessarily in a queue. So I think the waiting looks different. You're waiting outside of the queue for your reservation slot to open up. And instead of waiting in a queue, you're having a delicious snack. So that's a more pleasurable kind of waiting, but it's still waiting. Maybe you're like spending time on your phone trying to find that next reservation, and that's going to take time too. So I think it looks different, but it's still waiting. But what really got me was, in a previous video, I had talked about how last trip I had a ton of hip pain that was like keeping me up at night. It was so bad. And I'm pretty sure that this was from the standing in line instead of the walking, just because when I do a lot of walking, when I go on a hike with my family, I don't have the same problem. So I think it was the standing on the concrete. And I was thinking, if I can reduce that pain by skipping the lines, that alone could be worth the cost for me. Like that would be huge. So I don't know.
I am probably the only person who's excited that you also get the augmented reality photo feature and audio tours with Genie Plus. And really for me, that's something that justifies the cost a little bit because it's an added feature, at least, that is new. Whereas skipping a line is not new, it just costs money now. Definitely this is worth the cost though at Magic Kingdom, just because there's so many things to do and we can be a little bit slow sometimes. So a lightning lane here or there will really help. But I mean, I'm buying 4 of these and that's $60 and I would rather spend $60 on food at Epcot.
That's my comparison too, is would I rather skip the lines or would I rather have that money for food at Epcot? So ideally I would get Genie Plus for Magic Kingdom and Hollywood Studio Days of our trip. I'm not sure where our budget will land. So it's going to come down to like, what do our final numbers look like as we're heading into the trip? And do we want to spend that extra money? So I think this will be a decision that we make closer to our trip. I do not think that we're going to make Genie Plus reservations for the entire trip because that's something you can book it in advance, is having Genie Plus for your whole trip. And I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. But I do have a few considerations. And I think these impact both of us. So hear me out on these. I was thinking buying Genie Plus and also the fancy rides, the individual attraction selections, could allow you to get more done in less time. And then you could have a shorter trip overall, right? So that would be cheaper, even though it is money that might feel better spent eating food at Epcot. It would be cheaper than spending your money on additional nights, park tickets, food, all of that stuff that just comes with like being there, right? Like the cost of being there. It would cost less to buy skipping the line. So you could potentially shorten your trip. That's a thought I'm having.
That's a big one. I didn't even think of that, like weighing it that way. We'd have to get better at using Genie Plus before I could do it successfully, but I didn't even think of that one.
Yeah, so it's something to consider because we really wanted to have a longer trip so that we could slow down, we could still do the stuff we wanted to, but have a more relaxed trip. Well, I wonder, could we have a more relaxed trip and have it also be shorter than we had previously thought? So that's one thing. The other thing is, we plan on staying at a deluxe resort next time. We're planning on renting DVC points. So that's a deluxe resort. And that means we would have the 30-minute early park entry at all of the parks, unless they change all of this, right? But hopefully they're keeping it because they just rolled it out not that long ago. So 30 minutes early park entry at all of the parks and extra evening hours. And right now, I looked it up this week, right now those evening hours are just at Magic Kingdom and Epcot. They do each of them once a week for 2 hours. And it seems like you can get a whole lot done in those 2 hours. Molly and Quincy from Mollyers had another video about that, and they were getting through a lot of good rides. Not everything is open. Remy's Ratatouille Adventure was not open during that time, but it might be that you could get so much done in those 2 hours that could either negate or reduce the need for Genie Plus in those parks because you're getting that extra time. And again, you're paying for that through staying at a deluxe resort, but it's like, which paying for it makes the most sense here?
And as we've covered many times, we are much bigger fans of extra evening hours, and we were leaning towards a deluxe resort anyway. So I'll have to keep an eye on how that develops in the future, because I didn't even know it was 2 hours until you said this. 2 hours is brilliant and more than I think we've ever received staying on property. So that might be worth the extra cost for a deluxe resort for us.
It makes me nervous to try to stay up that late because I'm not someone who stays up late, but I thought I could have a rest day after that, maybe. Like if I plan it right, or if I have like an Epcot day after it and they open later or something like that. So I'm not trying to like stay up until midnight and then rope drop the next morning. Yikes.
And we don't rope drop. So maybe one day we will, I'm not going to say that we don't, because the way that we wake up, how early we wake up, how quick we get ready, and park open hours, all of those things could fit together and make us rope droppers, but historically, we are not. So we've talked about free Genie, Genie Plus, time for individual lightning lane. No, get it out of here. On principle, I can't stand it. Side note, I'm going to pay for Flight of Passage. We love that ride. I know the wait time is probably going to be insane, and we usually only spend about half a day in Animal Kingdom, and I'm not going to wait in a line for half of my half day. So I'll just deal with it. I know I'm going to pay for that one.
Just for the record, in the show notes, Melissa's notes say bite me. So all right, I was thinking about this, and it's hard to make this call this far out as well, because a lot's going to change with these individual attraction selections before we take our trips. So I think there's a good chance that Remy loses its virtual queue by then. And so the only way to guarantee you're getting on it is going to be to pay for it, because you will have lost the ability to make a boarding group reservation. So that's one thing. And then I think Guardians of the Galaxy and Tron should both be open by early 2023. I'm not positive about that. And so that, presumably, if they're going to keep doing 2 rides per park as fancy rides, that would knock off, I assume, Frozen Ever After and Space Mountain, because what's Space Mountain doing there anyway, right? It's just a placeholder for Tron. So I'm guessing that on our trip, we'll probably purchase some of these for the rides that we absolutely do not want to miss, because we're very excited about all of these new rides that we didn't experience in 2020. So I don't know, we'll see what things look like as we get a little closer to our trip. If we were going today, if we were leaving for Disney today, we would probably only pay for Rise of the Resistance, and we would rope drop the others to try and get on them without too long of a wait. I think on a future trip, I would pay for Flight of Passage, because I love that ride. I think that's my favorite ride right now. But our son isn't tall enough yet, and I feel like Flight of Passage doesn't change like some other rides change, right? So it's the same experience each time, and I have gone on it before. So I think I'd be okay missing it this trip, just because our son isn't tall enough and I don't want to pay for it or wait in a 3-hour line. So I think I'd be okay missing out one time.
So one time my daughter and I did wait in, I don't know if it was 3 hours or just under. It was, I believe, if it wasn't right, like the moment it opened, it was shortly after. And we didn't get a fast pass in my planning, and we still wanted to try it. I'm like, there is no way we're waiting. And I got off and I was like, I am so glad I waited in that 3-hour line, but I am never going to do that again. So Flight of Passage is definitely on my paid list, unless something else pops up that sort of makes it lose its shine and the lines just naturally dwindle by the time we go there. I don't quite anticipate that yet for Animal Kingdom. So Flight of Passage, I'm paying for you. You got me, Disney.
Yeah, I don't anticipate something changing in Animal Kingdom before our trips either, but I do have to think that something is coming with the other fancy ride in Animal Kingdom being Expedition Everest, which doesn't seem to make sense given the wait times there. So I think they have something else coming down the pike, and I will be very curious to see what that will be.
Here's a question for you. We've talked about this before. We're talking about it now. When are we coming back to talk about Genie Plus again? What's the interval?
What's the interval? Well, it's hard to say what the interval is when it's so new, right? So I think whenever we get fired up about it again, we're gonna have to talk about it.
But we do have to come back to it, because there's going to be more and more stuff coming out and changes made to it. It's going to be something interesting to watch develop while we're planning that next trip.
Absolutely. And we're going to need to make some decisions as we get closer to our next trip to decide where we're going to spend that money. So I'd like to do some planning as we get closer as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. What do you think about Genie Plus? Have you used it yet? Fill us in, and remember to like and subscribe to plan along with us.